The test is in 4 parts. Part 1, Part 2, Part 3, and Part 4. Now look at Part 1.
Part 1.
You will hear a job interview.
First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 5. Answer the questions as you listen, because you will not hear the recording a second time. Listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 5.
Please sit down, Mr. Wilson. My name's Jane Smith, and I'm the personnel manager.
Hello, how do you do?
Now, this is just a short preliminary interview. I'd like to talk about your present job and what you've done up till now.
Yes, of course.
Well, could you tell me how long you've had your present position in evening news? It is evening news, isn't it?
Yes, that's right. I'm not sure. Let's see. I left university in 2002. Is that right? Yes, 2002. Then I was unemployed for about 2 months, and then I travelled round Britain for a few weeks. So it must be more than 3 years now, in fact.
Yes. And have you any particular reason for wanting to change your job? I mean, why do you want to move?
Well, I actually like my present job and still find it interesting. The salary's okay, so it's nothing to do with money, though you can always do with more. I suppose the thing is that I'm really very ambitious and keen to get promoted. So that's the real reason.
You say you like your job. Can you tell me what aspect you like most?
Oh dear, that's difficult. There are so many things. My colleagues are quite nice to go along with, so there's a good cooperative atmosphere. And compared to other presses, the working conditions are great. I mean, the office itself is good.
Yes.
And then there's the fact that, as a journalist, I regularly write articles about what is happening at home or in the world. So I have to make decisions. I must be responsible for what I have written. You know, that's what I really like most about the job. They give me lots of room for initiative.
Yes. Well, we're looking for someone who isn't a clock watcher and who isn't too concerned about working fairly long hours.
Oh, I don't mind that. I'm used to it. I often work irregular hours. I was very often made to work at night.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 6 to 10. Now listen and answer questions 6 to 10.
Hi, John. Are you nearly ready?
Oh, no. I don't think I'm going to make it tonight.
Why?
I've got this assignment to finish for tomorrow.
Well, maybe I can help. What do you have to do?
I have to do a short presentation on some household object, and I just can't think of anything. I have to talk about what it is and the parts in it.
Well, why not make it simple? Why not describe a bottle or a can?
Well, that's far too simple.
OK, how about an aerosol can?
Maybe. What labels can you put on it?
First, you'd have to draw an aerosol can. First thing you could label would be the hairspray or whatever was in the can. You'd just label that product, I suppose. Then you'd have to label the area above the product as the propellant.
Is that the gas that presses down on the contents of the can, forcing it out through the dip tube?
Yes, you've got it.
OK. So far, so good. Now, at the top of the aerosol, there are quite a few things to label, so I'd have to write quite small.
Unless you drew a couple of lines and showed an enlarged picture of that area.
Yes, that would work. Then I could start labelling from the top to the bottom.
The first thing on the enlargement would be the nozzle.
The what?
The nozzle. You know, Nozzle. Then the seal.
Right. Then all I'd need is the spring.
No, you'd need to label the inlet first, then the final part would be the spring. Anyway, that's it. You've finished. We can go out now.
Well, I have to type all that into the computer first, and draw the can.
Oh!
That is the end of part 1.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 2.
Part 2.
You are going to hear a lecture.
First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 15. Now, listen carefully and answer questions 11 to 15.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's Ronald Jaff with this week's edition of Movie Talk. First, let's look at the films this week in the theatre. The Kid Rides Again, When You Find Love, and Wronged. The last of the three, Wronged, is definitely the best. In fact, one of the best films in a long time, with Henry Michelson and Joanne Seymour. It is about a man who gets a life sentence for a murder he did not commit. In the style of the films of the 40s and 50s, it is a modern story of a man and his wife, wonderfully played by Joanne Seymour. They fight to make people believe Thompson is the wrong man and not the killer. The strength of their love is wonderful, even after Thompson has been in prison for 15 years. Of course, I won't tell you what happens after Thompson's 15th year in prison. That would ruin the story. But if you see no other film, you should see this one. The story may be old, but the acting is great, and it will hold your attention from beginning to end. Unfortunately, I can't say the same for When You Find Love. Just another silly story about how boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy gets girl again, and they live happily ever after.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 16 to 20. Now listen and answer questions 16 to 20.
Hollywood ever get tired of such stupid films? Yet, on a New England college campus, the star of the movie, Tommy Seal, is a freshman. He meets the 2 years older Stephanie Fall, played by Sally Evans. In real life, she must be at least 30, not 20. Well, Billy, our hero, has had a hard time with Stephanie. After all, he is so much younger. But they fall in love in about a minute, as long as it takes to take a picture with a Polaroid, and they are both so happy, in true paradise, until Buck, the star football player, played by Ronco Starr, the only good acting in the film, steals Stephanie away from the poor Billy. He is, after all, a senior and football star, and the rest of the film is about, naturally, how Billy gets Stephanie back, making her remember their love. He shows her that he, not Buck, is the man for her. Well, if you can stand a stupid story and bad acting, then take your 8-year-old child to see When You Find Love. Anyone older will leave the theatre before the movie ends. And finally, The Kid Rides Again, a western about a young cowboy, Kit Barnes, who stops the bad guys, the robbers, the killers, and plain old bullies and helps the good guys. Kit is fast with a gun and never once in this cowboy. Kit is the cowboy who never stays in one place for a very long time, who leads a lonely but very free life. Nothing new on the storyline, but a good classic-style western with good acting. Peter Sells as Kit catches just the right mood. He's an excellent and natural cowboy. There are beautiful scenes of the open country in the West and enough action to hold your interest. A good cowboy film for those who, like me, always enjoy seeing the Old West. And now, before we go on with the news from Hollywood, a word from our sponsor.
That is the end of part 2.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 3.
Part 3.
You are going to hear a conversation between Bill and the counselor. You now have some time to look at questions 21 to 25. Now, listen to the conversation carefully and answer questions 21 to 25 by circling the correct letter A, B, or C.
Hello, Bill. What can I help you with?
Well, I was talking with a friend of mine who's doing a medical course, and he said that before I start taking sleeping pills, I should see you.
I see. Well, I can't prescribe any medicine, Bill, and I prefer not to encourage anybody to take sleeping pills. What I can do is to help you look at why you're not sleeping.
Okay, but I think it's because I don't know how to handle all the work.
I found that new students find college very different to school. The biggest difference seems to be that you have to get used to working more independently at college. And this can be difficult to pick up straight away. You can feel that you're not quite in control of it all.
That's right. I mean, with only a few lectures and tutorials each week, it looks like an easy workload, but then you suddenly realize that there are assignments, tests, and exams. I know I'm not the only one. I really prefer to work quietly in the library where the resources are, but its hours just don't suit my work and sleep habits.
Yes. Having a lot of time to manage and having to arrange to get everything done and still have time left over to relax and feel refreshed usually needs careful planning.
Yeah, that's right. I know. But it's hard to get started. My medical mate said you can help with getting organized, and I sure need it.
Okay then. I need to get a few details about your timetable and any other commitments. You can put them all down on this form if you like.
Now you have some time to look at questions 26 to 30. Listen to the second part of the conversation and answer questions 26 to 30 by completing the notes below. Write no more than 3 words for each answer.
Now, Bill, what's your main concern?
Well, what really gets me down at present is that the exams are coming up and I don't feel confident.
I know you've spent a lot of time preparing, so let's look at the actual exam itself. No matter how much preparation you do, it doesn't really count if you don't plan how you will time yourself to ensure you get to answer all the questions. Usually there will be some guide on the exam paper that will tell you the relative importance of each question, its contribution to your total mark.
I see. So if I feel organized at the start, I can be more confident.
Exactly. So once you've worked out an overall plan, and this can be done quickly, you need to make sure you know what each question is asking you to do. As a marker, I know what answers I expect to a question. Then you need to address the question, not just write down what you know and hope the marker will appreciate the hard study you've done.
Yes, that's important. I can see that markers are looking at the questions, not trying to guess what we know.
Yes. And the third point to keep in mind is that even if you know the topic well, you should leave time to go back and check your work for content. There may be an important point you have missed, or not explained as much as you wanted to. And at the same time, you can look for errors, including any obvious ones in grammar.
Okay, thanks. It's really simple in many ways, isn't it?
That is the end of part 3.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 4.
Part 4.
You will hear part of a lecture on the current and future use of mobile phones.
First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
Okay, now today we're looking at changes in communication, and specifically changes that have just happened or are likely to happen in the next few years. Key to this is the mobile phone, which is increasingly being seen as an all-purpose system rather than just a phone. If you only use your phone for texting and making calls now, you will be amazed at how you'll be using it in the future. The technology has been developed for a range of other uses. For example, phones could be used so that if you are meeting someone and they get lost, you could send them a map of your location to help them. This will save all those complicated explanations over the phone and our poor friends or colleagues trying to drive and find out where they are at the same time. And if you get bored waiting, or if you're traveling, for example, you will soon be able to see TV news on your phone as it is actually being broadcast. This means that you won't have to miss any of your favorites if you were away for a few days. Most people have got used to texting now, and young people send pictures to each other. But what is exciting is the possibility of putting music with them before you send them. And it's not all frivolous. Phones are going to become even more critical in business and education. Some recent developments have a highly practical usage. So, for example, as lecturers, we will be able to send everybody a text to let them know if lectures have been cancelled. And the new phones could have a further use in education, as well as business, as they will enable us to go to any destination, such as when we are doing a field trip, for instance. And from there, to send data directly to a computer so that we can access it when we get home. This means we will no longer be limited by what the phone can store. And it's interesting to look at the different ways that men and women use phones now, as that does affect how the technology will develop. Some research has been done on how people use phones, and some of the results are surprising. One of the increasing usages of mobile phones is to get all sorts of data, such as phone numbers, the weather, train times, etc. And while there's been an attempt to set up connections with things that women might be interested in accessing, it is overwhelmingly men who do this. But what about the traditional use of a phone? To speak to people? I suppose we would predict that it is mainly women who use phones as a method of contact for friends and family, but, in fact, the genders exploit this facility equally. I've spoken about the increased business usages that phones will offer, and I suppose we would associate this usage with men. The survey picked up, though, that women are often working from home or catching up with work in the evenings, so they use phones in this way as much as men do. Most of us are aware we can store photos on our phones. It's an ideal method of capturing a moment wherever you are. Women tend to be the group that keep photos on their phones, but it seems that men use their phones to actually take pictures much more than women do. And of course, all this knowledge affects the marketing that the companies will do in order to sell the phone.
That is the end of part 4.
You now have half a minute to check your answers. That is the end of the test. You now have 10 minutes to transfer your answers to your Ielts listening answer sheet.